Technology and accountability is what I'm going to be talking about. And the first section is individual complexity and social life. So Hilbrand claims that language, speech, and writing emerge as key affordances through which the self articulates its relationship to the cultural, social, and psychological forces that traverse and constitute it, and obtains awareness over its own actions and commitments. Janis says that the claim could perhaps be extended to the technologies of computing and communication. She then references Goody and says that historically, the technologies of computing and communication carry into a new stage the techniques and social practices for recording, indexing, and storing information. A reflection on schematic non-speech forms of writing suggests strong affinities with the cognitive templates of computation and indicates that standardized forms for recording reality have been widely used in history as people sought to assemble the facts of life as pliable information. She gives the implications of the development of the deployment of writing methods and schemes for recording reality and says that it seldom stops. She says that they feed back to social agents, forming their cognitive and perceptual habits and shaping their analytical skills. So basically what I got from this section is that, and she also says it at the very end, that whatever we read and write affects us in various ways. And the next slide is examples that she gave, and then I just put some pictures on there to make it more, interesting. So she says it affects us in how we communicate. So I put this little picture here. And then she said it affects our actions, so it alters our actions, and it affects how we think, so it affects our thoughts. And I thought these pictures here did a good job of bringing what I just said, making it more vivid, not so dull, I guess. She goes on to talk about how writing has positive and negative effects, and that the contribution of writing in forming the modern individual should be beyond any doubt. So for good writing, I put this little pyramid here, and it gives like things that you can get from, people that write. If you read something that's been written good, and it's like empathy, or people have attention to detail, self-discipline, ability to prioritize. And then here I put this little newspaper clipping. It's kind of like, I guess, negative, because news is usually negative. But I put that there to give an example that, like, how things are distorted, I guess you could say, in media, and how in order to obtain the positive things, you have to do way more research, way more digging to get, I guess, the real truth. You can't just be only watching Fox News and expect them to tell you the exact truth about, the Democrats, and vice versa. You can't watch just NBC and expect that to be the best way to achieve your news. So I use that as an example because a lot of times people just stay focused on one thing and not the other, and they only get the negative from the Democrats because they only watch Fox News, or they only get the negative from the Republicans because they only watch NBC. So I use that as an example. Another thing is that Janis suggests Goody has a point about the growing involvement of computing in social and personal life. In the example I think of is social media and all it entails. So in this section, she talks about how the involvement of computing in social and personal life may promote as Goody suggests, that the cognitive simplification and legibility of one's own life, and by extension the pursuit of objectives under conditions that can be recalled, inspected, controlled, or monitored. So I just use social media because that's something that you can go look back on. You control it and it's monitored. And then when she talks about personal life, I just put something that deals solely with yourself, like the chart below presents, and the chart below is kind of small, but it says the first line's like stuff that references just to you, like say your calendar, the pictures you take, the music you listen to, the places you go, the people you talk to, the food you eat, anything that just entails you. So I use that as that example. And the next thing to be discussed, I would say, is Luhmann's issue. And she basically says that technology can be constructed and realized even though the world and the society where this takes place is unknown. Self-assessing emancipation of individuals, even irrational individuals. And she says that it changes social imperatives for individuality, and that the question is no longer what I should be, but rather how I should be. Whenever an individual is marginalized by technology in this way, a sense of distance achieved that allows the individual to observe its own observation. And an individual in the modern sense is someone who can observe his or her own observing. So, she, in that section, I just feel like she's saying that technology is realized and constructed through the world, and the society where it takes place is usually unknown. I don't know how to what I would say about that, but yeah, I just think that it's interesting that she brings in that issue. Also, she goes on to talk about how there's no intention to advocate for technology. And this, when you read this article, this section, you can clearly see that she's not advocating for technology, but rather getting us to see both sides. And that leads us to slides. She talks about how social change is double-edged, and the developments that are associated with the growing infiltration of daily living by the technologies of computing are no exception. So she feels that a defensive attitude may fail to do justice to the central role it plays in constituting contemporary life forms. Ultimately, in legal terms, she talks about the fear of control stems from a view of individual life that considers privacy and self-determination as the core of individuality. Privacy and self-determination are lied to a sphere of interiority which the individual may want to in her own terms and protect it from others. She goes on to say that in this chapter, she suggests that rather than being a disembodying ideal individuality, is a project in which persons are given the option with freedom and autonomy, but also the tools by means of which they become able to explore the social space in the discovery and pursuit of their objectives. So in that part right there, I like to think about how, she also says that freedom without capacity is an empty word. So basically basically an individual is someone that has to have freedom, the autonomy, and the tools to do whatever he or she is in pursuit of. And so you can't have just freedom, or you can't just have the tools. You have to have both in order for it to work. The next section is persisting issues, and She claims that supporting the idea that technological forms of constructing and monitoring one's own cognitive and cultural environment may, at least in some respects, strengthen rather than undermine individuality and intentional action. So for individuality, I use this picture of this red rose in between all these white flowers because when you think of individuality, you think of something that is set apart from the rest. And I thought that picture got that point across clearly. And for intentional action, I use this picture up here where the kids are going to they have a bucket of water up there with a string attached to it to pull down on that person walking through the door. So it's intentional. They know what they're going to do. It's not like an accident. It's not just something that they did. They planned to do this to this person. So it's an intentional action. And an example of individuality would be to have freedom to do what you want while also having tools to do such thing, which I briefly discussed in the previous slide. So then it goes on to say that the growing involvement of computing technology in social life and monitoring of the details that make the course of everyday living may provide social agents with an array of capacities, reasons, and resources that enhance their ability to deal with the variety of circumstances confronting them. And that viewed technologies of computing and communication can similarly to writing contribute to constructing a legible social space in which social agents are able to trace a variety of motives and situations, project and pursue their objectives, and recall and retroactively track their actions or commitments. Conditions are conducive to forms of human agency that are considerably autonomous and accountable. So for the growing involvement of computing technology, I put example social media such as Instagram or Facebook because it fits in with like how she describes it, and those are good examples of that because people use that to keep in contact. People use that, and you can people can use that to track your actions or commitments, and that's why I put that there for an example. And as for the example to forms of human agency that are considerably autonomous and accountable, such as this picture, the robot creating more robots. So the scientist is walking in and his robot is creating more like robots or like more technology, and whatever his robot creates, the scientist isn't accountable for because he created that robot. So I feel like in that picture it kind of gives a little brief description of everything she's trying to say. How when you create something, whatever happens because of your creation, whether it be good or bad, is also something that you are accountable for. And I think she's trying to get that point across when she talks about that. So she gives like a list of problems and how profiling and atomic computing are a part of these problems, and they represent a wider problem of transparency and impartiality. She says that the more access to data, the more reliance on automated forms of data processing. So the more the internet lets us access other things, the less we need certain things, you know. And I gave the example, an example of that would be like paying your bills online, your credit cards. You don't have to like get a money order and mail it. You don't have to use the postal service to pay your bills anymore, really. Rather, you just need to have an internet connection and a computer or your phone and get online, set up an account, and just pay it from there, as well as having your checking account online, you know. And that's an example of that. Issues of transparency and impartiality are endemic to social and cognitive environment. And she says that the problem is aggravated by looping effects. So I feel like what she's trying to say is that it's not that technology. I feel like this whole thing is just she's trying to say that technology is very much helpful in a lot of ways, but that we as people need to realize that whatever we create or help create or do, whether the effects be great or bad, that reflects on us, and we need to realize that. So the final thoughts I have, I'll just give one more example. Cars. When cars were invented, before that people had to walk everywhere or use horses or wagons or whatever. And cars are great. They get you from point A to point B, and it's made a lot of things a lot easier. But also we got to recognize that cars are bad for our environment. Most of them, not all of them. They're making smart cars now and stuff like that, that are better for the environment. But also, we need the people that invented something great, but also with that comes like the environmental problems, pollution, and all that. So even though they didn't purposely, they invented it for something good. The reactions that happen after that purpose still fall back on us, so we're still accountable for what we do.